Welcome to the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast.
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 Welcome to the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast with me, Dr. Janine Anderson. Heads up, this show may contain adult language and may mention specific foods. If you find either of those to be too triggering, I trust you to take care of yourself and do what you need to do. This podcast is sponsored by Ipono Maui and ED Care. Ipono Maui is led by internationally renowned expert on eating disorders, Dr. Anita Johnston. Located in a home-like oceanfront facility in beautiful Maui, Hawaii, Ipono offers residential, partial hospitalization, and intensive outpatient treatment for eating disorders. Visit iponomaui.com, spelled AIPONOMAUI, to learn more. ED Care has provided PHP, IOP, and outpatient treatment for all genders 18 and over since 2001. CAMSA, which stands for Connection, Acceptance, Mindfulness, Sense of Self, and Action, is ED Care's mindfulness-based treatment approach and is incorporated into each individualized treatment plan. Facilities are located in Denver, Colorado Springs, and Kansas City, and all treatment is supported by master's-level clinicians or higher. ED Care offers 4 specialty tracks for binge eating disorder, elite athletes, substance use, and trauma. And the Connections House, an affordable supportive housing component, adds an extra layer of supervised support. Visit eatingdisorder.care or call 866-771-0861. Hey everybody, I am so excited because even though I'm not recording this on February 27th, 2018, you will hear this February 27th, 2018, which is book launch day for me. So my book, Recover Your Perspective, is officially out and available on Amazon. I, of course, would love and appreciate your support if you're interested in that. And I will try to put links in the show notes. I will try to put the direct link to the Amazon page. However, that goes up at kind of the last minute. So if I can't put the direct link to the Amazon page, what I will do is link to my website that has info about the books, which will have the Amazon page link on it always. So it's one extra step, but you could find it there. You could also look up the title of the book or put my name into Amazon. I really doubt that there are that many Janine spelled the way that my parents chose to spell it. Anyway, I just wanted to say first, thank you to everybody who's been so supportive and excited about the book coming out. I'm really excited. I'm really grateful. I hope that you all find it helpful. I hope that there are some concepts in there that really help you to kind of wrap your head around what's going on for you in your eating disorder and some stuff that you can really relate to. Definitely would encourage you to bring the book with you to therapy or to your dietitian appointments or to treatment, whatever the case may be, whatever is most helpful. Of course, there are going to be things that don't really fit for everybody. The book is about different concepts from CBT, DBT, and ACT. So I highly doubt that every single thing is going to be really spot on for you, but there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to hit really well for different people. So it'll be cool to see how that all plays out for everybody. Like I said, I'm super excited. This has been such a long process. I'm very grateful to everybody who's helped me along the way, and I've had a lot of help and support. Also, of course, I'm totally anxious and terrified because it's really vulnerable. So my real hope is that it will help people and that you all will really get a lot out of it and will help clarify part of the experience that you're living through. So what we're doing today for the podcast is I'm releasing one of the chapters of the book, just read to you audiobook style. This chapter is about emotional dysregulation. One of the 4 core modules in DBT is emotion regulation. So it's learning how to change emotions that you want to change. And this talks about when your eating disorder emotionally dysregulates you, when the eating disorder knocks you off balance a little bit. So I want you to keep in mind as you listen to this chapter, this is absolutely not me saying your emotions aren't valid. Your emotions are too big and unwelcome. They're too much. That's not what I'm saying at all. Emotional dysregulation is talking about when you know that you are really emotionally worked up about something and you kind of feel like you want to act out impulsively based on it. So that's like if you get a sassy text from somebody and your feelings feel hurt and you feel really, really hurt and upset or pissed off by that and you want to text them back something nasty right away, that's being emotionally dysregulated. It's not saying that you shouldn't feel upset. It's not saying your feelings are wrong, but it's speaking to how all of us have these moments where we get a little bit emotionally off balance. We are really worked up. The feeling is really intense, and we want to act out impulsively in part to make that feeling go away. So this talks about how this happens within the context of an eating disorder. So again, please don't hear this as me saying your emotions are wrong. That's not what this chapter is about. This chapter is about how the eating disorder will work you up and get you more emotionally upset than you probably would be if you didn't have one, because it's trying to get you to impulsively use eating disorder behaviors. All right, here we go. Emotional dysregulation. Emotion regulation is one of the 4 modules taught in DBT. Emotion regulation, in its simplest terms, is defined as how to change emotions you would like to change. The goals of emotion regulation are to understand and name your emotions, decrease frequency of unwanted emotions, decrease emotional vulnerability, and decrease emotional suffering. In contrast to emotion regulation, emotional dysregulation is characterized by a difficulty or inability to manage your emotions, often intensely experiencing emotions and then behaving in a way that is outside of what is typically considered acceptable. When you're emotionally dysregulated, you are having big, overwhelming emotions and make decisions that are rash or out of proportion with the situation. When you are emotionally dysregulated, the saying, "your emotions have got the better of you," applies. Emotional dysregulation occurs when you're so angry you send an email back to someone before considering the consequences. It's when your partner says something hurtful and you threaten to, or actually do, end the relationship impulsively. It's when you feel devastated by an unexpected outcome and hastily dash to the grocery store, buy all of your favorite foods, and binge. With emotional dysregulation, the emotional response is more than what's expected, and the behavior used in dealing with your overwhelming emotions is unhelpful to you. With emotional dysregulation, the emotional response is more than what's expected, and the behavior used in dealing with your overwhelming emotions is unhelpful to you. Everyone becomes emotionally dysregulated at times. No need to shame yourself. DBT emphasizes changing the behaviors associated with big, overwhelming emotions so you don't do something either unhelpful or that could have negative consequences. Your eating disorder wants you to be emotionally dysregulated, so you will impulsively turn to eating disorder behaviors to soothe yourself. Your eating disorder is invested in blowing your emotions out of proportion, making them feel bigger, more upsetting, and less manageable than they are in reality. Through emotional dysregulation, your eating disorder drives you to act on momentary impulses to use eating disorder behaviors. What's worse is that after you impulsively use eating disorder behaviors, the temporary relief from restricting, binging, and purging will wear off, and you'll feel bad about impulsively using the behaviors in the first place. This is the eating disorder vicious cycle. Emotional dysregulation perpetuates the eating disorder by upsetting you and causing you to act rashly. Food. Inappropriately using food, as is the case with restricting, binging, and purging, is often the response to feeling emotionally dysregulated. However, your eating disorder can also cause you to become emotionally dysregulated about food itself. Ironically, becoming emotionally dysregulated about food also leads to using behaviors. One way your eating disorder sets you up to feel emotionally dysregulated with food is by implementing rigid food rules, limiting your nutrition and your fun. But these are also difficult to maintain in your life. One example of this is your eating disorder not allowing you to eat certain food groups. Here, let's use sugar as an example of a food forbidden by your eating disorder. Your eating disorder doesn't want you to eat any sugar, ever. If you do, you'll instantly become fat and your life will fall to pieces. The hard part is that sugar is ubiquitous, and abstaining from all sugar all the time is impossible. Therein lies the setup. You're invited to a friend's birthday party. At the party, there's alcohol, sugar, entrees with carbs. Better abstain from those as well. And then there's cake and ice cream. Instantly, your eating disorder throws an internal temper tantrum, because that's what eating disorders do. This is the eating disorder emotionally dysregulating you. Your eating disorder is offended by the cake and ice cream, saying, why is there cake and ice cream here? That is horrible for you. I hate birthday parties. I should never have come. I hate everything. What am I supposed to do? Eat it? Yes, that's the idea. To eat and enjoy cake and ice cream for that special occasion. The rigid rules your eating disorder commands you to follow make it extremely upsetting when you don't follow them. In reality, eating some sugar on special occasions is not as dangerous as your eating disorder wants you to think. But breaking such a serious rule causes you distress. It causes you to feel emotionally dysregulated. One of my clients talked about how she, quote, ate bad things while on a camping trip. This meant she ate things her eating disorder didn't allow, normal camp food like trail mix, hot dogs, and s'mores. Eating those foods on a camping trip is not a big deal. Her eating disorder didn't have the same opinion, though. Her eating disorder used emotional dysregulation to get her completely bent out of shape about eating these foods, forcing her to feel disproportionately upset about her food choices when, in reality, she had nothing to feel bad about. For days after the trip, she restricted her food intake, feeling overwhelmed and disoriented by the massive amount of guilt she felt for enjoying those camp foods. She also exercised excessively to try to compensate for what she ate. The restricting and over-exercising were both eating disorder behaviors resulting from her feeling emotionally dysregulated. Another example comes from a client struggling with binging and purging. She's been working hard on reducing both those behaviors and was having some success. The days between each binge-purge episode were growing. One day, after a stressful interaction with her ex-boyfriend, she binged and purged. Her eating disorder manipulated this, blowing her emotional reaction out of proportion. Yes, it is upsetting to use behaviors after a long streak of not using them, but it's not the worst thing that can happen. Relapses and slips are part of the process. Instead, her eating disorder completely emotionally dysregulated her by making her feel guilty, angry at herself, and utterly hopeless about her future in recovery. As she sat in my office, bawling, she said she could never recover. She also said she had felt so hopeless, sad, angry, and guilty that she'd binged and purged multiple times per day. Her eating disorder took the normal upset and disappointment of having a slip after her interaction with her ex and blew her emotions out of proportion, causing her to use behaviors to manage the difficult emotions. Of course, this perpetuated the cycle. Emotional dysregulation about food is a skillful setup on the part of your eating disorder. You're frequently interacting with food, multiple times per day or more, providing your eating disorder numerous opportunities to make your emotions about food seem unmanageable. Luckily, because our opportunities to interact with food are plentiful, each interaction isn't as significant. One food choice will not make or break you. Being flexible and gentle with yourself when it comes to your food choices can help keep your emotions manageable. Self. In this section about emotional dysregulation and self, I want to discuss body image. Your eating disorder loves using emotional dysregulation to make you unnecessarily upset about your body. Recall that emotional dysregulation is twofold. The emotional response is more than what's expected, and the behavior used to deal with the overwhelming emotions is unhelpful to you. Your eating disorder will cause you to become overly upset about your body and prompt you to use unhelpful eating disorder behaviors to resolve those feelings. One way this can happen is with weight. If you weigh yourself, please stop. I've never worked with a client trying to recover from an eating disorder who found weighing him or herself helpful. I've only seen it prove extremely upsetting. Weighing yourself allows your eating disorder to take an arbitrary, often inaccurate number with little meaning and use it to ruin your day. With emotional dysregulation, if you get on the scale and the number is higher, your eating disorder will create an extreme emotional response. You might feel infuriated, devastated, or immobilized by shame and disgust. This response is out of proportion, and I'm not saying this to invalidate your feelings. I'm showing you how the eating disorder is manipulating you. Your eating disorder makes you hastily decide you're not going to eat for the rest of the day, or that you're going to try to purge to compensate for what you do eat. All this is because your eating disorder was able to get you worked up over a meaningless number on the scale. Emotional dysregulation can happen with body image as well. If you look in the mirror and your eating disorder notices a dimple of cellulite or a shapely curve, your eating disorder is going to throw you into complete emotional chaos. It will cause you to feel the deepest and most painful shades of emotion you're capable of feeling. When you're emotionally dysregulated about body image, your eating disorder's opinion of how attractive your butt is can ruin your day. When you recover your perspective, instead of seeing things solely through the eyes of your eating disorder, can you see how silly that is? Emotional dysregulation about body image directly results in using eating disorder behaviors. Your eating disorder makes you unnecessarily, disproportionately freak out about your thighs and causes you to impulsively restrict your calories, purge your meals, or binge to punish yourself. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, the flatness of your abdomen is insignificant. Other things matter more. Who will you see that day? What will you learn? What will you enjoy? And what things will challenge you? Those are the things that count. Others. When you have an eating disorder, it's easy to become emotionally dysregulated about other people. Eating disorders are nosy. They constantly compare you to other people, but what's going on with other people is none of your business. Please read this or listen to this, knowing that I'm saying this with kindness, and I want to relieve you of the burden of concerning yourself with things that have nothing to do with you. Comparison is the vehicle your eating disorder uses to drive you toward emotional dysregulation. With emotional dysregulation, your eating disorder will get you worked up over someone else's choices and cause you to respond to that behavior in a way that's unhelpful by using behaviors. Just as your eating disorder emotionally dysregulates you about your own body image, it will do that with other people's bodies as well. Your eating disorder constantly compares your body to other people's bodies. When it does that, you'll always come up short. Then, your eating disorder takes your emotions and magnifies them until they feel unmanageable. For example, you're walking around the grocery store. You look over at the woman at the end of the aisle. You scan her up and down, and you notice she's thinner than you. And she's buying cookies. Your eating disorder takes the opportunity to emotionally melt down. You start to feel bad about yourself, ashamed of your body. You feel sad you're not the same size as her. And you feel enraged that she's thinner than you and eats cookies. By now, you're completely worked up, so upset you could cry or punch something. You resolve to stick with your food rules until you look the same as her. In that example, your eating disorder made something out of nothing through comparison. That woman's body and her choice to buy cookies have nothing to do with you. They certainly shouldn't hold enough power to ruin your day by making you emotionally spiral out of control. Your eating disorder followed things up by making you commit to restricting for the rest of the day. Your eating disorder can concern you with other people's bodies and their food choices, but your eating disorder can also get its nose in other people's business in other ways. Remember, eating disorders are nosy. Comparison doesn't stop with food and weight. Your eating disorder will use comparison to create emotional dysregulation in any domain. Common areas that eating disorders compare to others are achievement-oriented areas, such as work, money, grades, status. Many of my clients are students. School provides endless opportunities for comparison, especially with grades. Comparing your grades to someone else's sets you up to feel inadequate because you need to earn a perfect score each time, or run the risk of measuring up as less than. My clients will mention how they find out someone else is doing better than them in school and how this is extremely upsetting to them. I've heard several clients say they were upset after receiving a 97% score because they knew someone who got 100%. Their eating disorder causes them to be emotionally dysregulated, sending them into a tailspin about an excellent, almost flawless 97% grade. Sometimes my clients tell me this turns into days of berating themselves with vicious self-talk, using eating disorder behaviors to punish themselves. Emotional dysregulation from comparison to others is limitless, and your eating disorder knows this. If it's not school, it could be your workplace or an organization you volunteer for, or your church or your flag football team. Your eating disorder loves to compare, determine you don't measure up, and flood you with overwhelming emotions. In addition to comparison, your eating disorder will emotionally dysregulate you by diminishing your ability to handle feedback from others. Of course, there are instances in life when someone gives you feedback that's hurtful and unhelpful. But there are other times when feedback, though difficult to hear, is delivered in a caring manner and is meant to help you grow. Your eating disorder doesn't like the idea of you growing, improving, and showing resilience in the face of difficult feedback. Consider this example. At work, it's time for your biannual performance review. This is a standard practice, and its purpose is to give you feedback about how you're doing. Your supervisor tells you she loves the work you're doing. On the company's performance evaluation form, you receive the highest ratings in 19 out of the 20 categories. This is a wonderful accomplishment you can allow yourself to feel proud of. However, you're not likely to binge, purge, or restrict if you allow yourself to feel proud or happy with your review. Instead, your eating disorder enters the picture. Its agenda is to emotionally dysregulate you. The sole category in which you received critical feedback is where your eating disorder wants for you to focus, so you'll become upset. You were told that you could improve in a minor area, but in an emotionally dysregulated response, you feel deeply wounded by this feedback. It feels harsh, wounding, like someone scratching you on a sunburn. Your eating disorder spends the rest of the day causing you to ruminate on how wounded you feel, driving you to feel so dysregulated that it's difficult for you to finish your workday without crying at your desk. Of course, this leads to using behaviors. Your eating disorder emotionally dysregulates you either by comparison, in which you never measure up and feel dissatisfied with yourself, or by making you hypersensitive to others' feedback. Other people can certainly be cause for upset. However, it's helpful to have awareness about how your eating disorder willfully distorts reality to throw you into emotional dysregulation, setting you up to binge, purge, and restrict. Treatment. Your eating disorder will emotionally dysregulate you about treatment as well. The eating disorder can do this in several ways. First, it can upset you over feedback you get from your current treatment team. Secondly, it can upset you about recommendations for a higher level of care. And finally, it can upset you over progress and recovery itself. Emotional dysregulation about treatment is when you become disproportionately upset about a treatment-related issue or recommendation and act rashly either by using eating disorder behaviors or by disengaging from treatment. Much like the earlier section where we explored how your eating disorder fragilizes you, decreasing your ability to handle feedback from others, your eating disorder also does this with your current treatment team and treatment plan. For example, I once worked with a wonderful client with whom I had a strong therapeutic rapport. She and I had worked together for nearly a year in individual therapy. At one point in therapy, we began working on moving her through her ambivalence about recovery to fully committing to recovery. In doing this, we had to highlight in therapy the ways her eating disorder was not serving her anymore. We needed to deeply explore its harmful effects on her health, her life, and her soul without cushioning the truth with denial. During one session, she shared that her eating disorder was getting in the way of her relationships. Not only could she not enjoy any social events involving food, such as going to dinner with a friend, but she constantly felt numb and emotionally disconnected from others. I reflected this back to her, meaning I gently repeated what she just said aloud, verbatim. Instantly, her body language changed. She stiffened in the chair. She told me with an upset tone of voice that she felt I was criticizing her for having an eating disorder. For a brief moment, I felt blindsided. That was not what I was saying at all. I'd merely reflected back her own words. I quickly realized this was not my client, but her eating disorder speaking to me instead. Her eating disorder had taken what I'd said, the client's own words in fact, and had twisted them into criticism, causing my client to feel hurt, shame, and rejection. The client felt so hurt she began to cry and shared that she didn't want to finish the session. I gently explained what I thought was happening, that this was her eating disorder sabotaging our session by emotionally dysregulating her. After some deep breaths and a moment to process, the client softened, her posture relaxed, and she said, "I don't know what happened. I got all emotional out of nowhere." Her eating disorder did this to try to stop our session, to upset her so she'd go home and use behaviors. And because it disliked we were starting to do deep therapeutic work directly threatening the eating disorder's existence. It wanted her to feel unmanageably upset and to impulsively decide to discontinue the session. Another way eating disorders dysregulate you is by causing intense, unmanageable feelings about treatment recommendations. It's not uncommon for therapists, dietitians, or other members of a treatment team to recommend that their clients seek a higher level of care or additional treatment. This might mean you need to add nutrition counseling to your week instead of only individual therapy. It might mean group therapy would be helpful as part of your treatment plan. And it might mean that you need to seek treatment in an intensive outpatient, partial hospitalization, residential, or higher setting. When your treatment team makes these recommendations, they are doing it because they care about your best interests and genuinely believe more care is what you need. A treatment recommendation is only a factual piece of feedback. Your eating disorder requires more care right now than your current treatment team can provide. Of course you would feel upset if your treatment team is making this recommendation. No one wants to hear that they need to do more treatment, potentially interrupting their life to recover. But sometimes there's no other way. Emotional dysregulation occurs when your eating disorder has an emotional meltdown about more treatment. You may feel like crying, or as if you want to yell, or feel so overwhelmed you can't find words to speak. Almost instantly, you firmly reject the idea of more treatment and adamantly state you won't go. Your eating disorder ruled that out as a possibility immediately after it was mentioned, based on the intense emotions the eating disorder itself created. Another way you can experience emotional dysregulation is about your progress in treatment. It's a bold move on your eating disorder's part to criticize your progress in recovery, and it's a story I've heard over and over. Eating disorders are viciously judgmental when it comes to evaluating your progress, ironic as that may be. Relapse especially is an area where eating disorders emotionally dysregulate you in an attempt to get you to quit treatment or to give up on recovery altogether. All it takes is one tiny setback for your eating disorder to throw in the towel. It can be something as small as not being able to eat your full meal or eating something you enjoy slightly past physical fullness. Instead of seeing small setbacks as normal, unavoidable, necessary parts of the recovery process, your eating disorder turns them into something much worse. Instead of feeling reasonably frustrated, discouraged, or sad about a setback, your eating disorder intensifies the emotion until it becomes unmanageable. And in the moment when you've been knocked off center emotionally, your eating disorder says, "Forget this, let's quit." This gives you permission to take steps backward rather than correcting course and getting back on track with recovery. Your eating disorder undermines your recovery by emotionally dysregulating you about treatment recommendations, the feedback you receive in treatment, and about your progress toward treatment goals. The takeaway: emotional dysregulation is a powerful 1-2 punch to your recovery. Your eating disorder delivers the first punch by escalating your emotional upset until it reaches a point of feeling intolerable. Then, Your eating disorder jabs by hastily driving you to behave in unhelpful ways like quitting treatment, acting out toward other people, or by causing you to restrict, binge, or purge. Emotional dysregulation sets you up to use eating disorder behaviors to relieve difficult emotions. This is all part of your eating disorder's goal to keep itself going. As you learn to recognize when you are emotionally dysregulated, you can choose ways to cope with difficult feelings other than using behaviors. Cultivating emotion and regulation skills is critical for recovery.
Thanks for joining me for another episode. Let's keep in touch. You can find all the information you need about the podcast at eatingdisorderrecoverypodcast.com, including full podcast episodes and links to all of our social media sites. You can join our Facebook group for the podcast by searching Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast on Facebook. This is a closed group for listeners of the podcast looking to connect, share resources, and get involved in a pro-recovery community. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or YouTube. Please leave us a review and let us know how we're doing. Talk to you next time on the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast.